Hi, my name is Kathleen Bates, and I'm a program manager for the Youth and Community Initiatives Division at the Texas School Safety Center. I oversee our statewide youth tobacco prevention programs in the Youth Initiatives program. So today's topic is about the historical practices of tobacco industry marketing to the U.S. military. Our featured guest is Dr. Joel Dunnington, who is a former diagnostic radiology professor at UT MD Anderson Cancer Center. Throughout his life as a doctoral student and his career, Dr. Dunnington has been involved in numerous advocacy activities. He actually served as a chief consultant with the Texas Attorney General's office on the Texas tobacco lawsuit in the late 90s. He's received awards for his work in tobacco prevention, and he's served on several boards, including the Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, which he serves as secretary now. Our conversation today uncovers interesting information about how tobacco companies essentially infiltrated the U.S. military and addicted generations of enlisted men. We also discuss the impact and aftermath of the tobacco industry's tactics and recommendations the Department of Defense should be implementing to protect current and future servicemen and women from the tobacco industry. So, I really hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Joel Dunnington. So, we're here today to talk about a really important topic, and that is taking a look at the historical use of tobacco products within the military community. A lot of people don't know that the tobacco industry has been targeting groups of people for decades. And a lot of people don't know that they also target our military, our servicemen and women. And so I think in honor of Veterans Day, I think it'd be good for us to kind of have a conversation about their marketing, targeting tactics, and some of the deceitful things that they have done in the past and almost how it has continued to today. As far as my knowledge goes, I know World War I and World War II were huge opportunities for the tobacco industry to target military men. So, I just love to hear your thoughts and hear from you, your knowledge about what some of the terrible things that they've done to target enlisted men back in the day.
Well, first of all, the history actually goes back further than that. In 1776, the colonies paid France for guns and ammunition with tobacco. So the military history of tobacco goes back even further. The big kicker started probably at World War I. And General Pershing has this quote of, send me more tobacco, the men need tobacco. And so we shipped millions of pounds of tobacco to Europe for the American soldiers who were in World War I. And I'm not sure about the black soldiers at that time, if they gave them tobacco or not. But in World War II, in the C rations and the K rations that the soldiers had, the rations for the black soldiers did not have cigarettes. The rations for the white soldiers did have cigarettes. And the rations continued having cigarettes through World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. It only stopped in 1975. So we gave them free cigarettes to all the servicemen, especially the ones who were deployed and actually fighting.
Yeah. You said it goes back to 1776?
Yes, 1776.
So the Revolutionary War
The Revolutionary War.
So
that's
the
right.
foundation of our country almost.
That's right.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. There are tobacco plants carved into the columns in the Capitol building. In the top of the fluted columns, there's tobacco plants.
Yeah.
Because that's basically how the country started. If it hadn't been for tobacco, Jamestown probably would have died on the vine.
Yeah. In my own research, I had seen that it was basically a cash crop,
Yes.
It was the only reason that our first colony was able to survive.
Right.
So,
and then that's what brought slaves in, because tobacco is hard to grow and it's very labor intensive to grow. And that's when they brought slaves into Jamestown to help grow tobacco. not cotton. Most people think it was cotton, but it was really tobacco to start with. And so the history in the military started in World War One. I'm sure there was tobacco in the Civil War, but it wasn't tobacco industry so much. Starting in 1905, when we passed the first law for the precursor to the FDA, everything that was in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia was to be regulated by the FDA at that time. And the 1895 edition of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia had tobacco and alcohol in it. But in 1905, somehow that disappeared from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. None of my research has shown how it disappeared or who did that. So when the FDA took over tobacco, when it took over all the drugs that were in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, tobacco and alcohol were not in them. And so the FDA didn't have any regulatory authority over tobacco at that time. And so when World War I came along, they had no say-so in the tobacco being sent to the American troops in Europe at that time. And the first studies on tobacco that showed that it actually killed people and injured people didn't start coming out until the 20s and 30s. And the big studies came out in the 50s. And so the first Surgeon General's report wasn't until 1963 on tobacco. And so it took us a while to really figure out that tobacco really was bad for you. But it took the military even longer. And so they quit giving cigarettes and the C rations in 75. But the tobacco industry has tried to sabotage everything the Department of Defense has tried to do to improve tobacco use amongst their employees. So they've known for a good long time. There were studies from the 80s. They showed that smoking recruits did much worse on physical training, on their initial 1.5 mile runs they had to make. The smokers were always slower than the non-smokers, and they've known this for a long time. And one of the things I was reading about that I hadn't really thought about for a while, but the Department of Defense sells cigarettes in commissaries or did. Some of that's now stopped, but in commissaries and base exchanges. And so they're one of the few companies in the world, companies in quotes, that make money off of selling tobacco, but also have to pay for the health benefits of the bad things that happen to those people from using tobacco. So most other companies really don't have that problem. Retailers don't worry about the folks they employ being sick, So the tobacco industry has marketed to the military in many different ways. Starting in the 30s when the USO was formed, they gave out free cigarettes. The USO has been with the military for, I think, since the 30s, both domestically and foreign offices. They provide welfare and recreation and relief to soldiers, and they would hand out, drinks and have food and stuff to drink and also cigarettes. And this has continued all the way to Desert Storm, where the USO was involved in giving out free cigarettes.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the research that I had done had seen that sometimes tobacco companies would send employees to different bases so that there was some type of tobacco company representation among different branches of the military, and that they would pass out those samples and whatnot. But I'd also read that they had sponsored concerts, different types of entertainment for men and women that had gone overseas. I know back in the 40s and 50s, I'm sure that was very heavy-handed. sponsoring different types of concerts and whatnot for the men overseas and whatnot. And even myself, when I look at a lot of the advertising, there is a lot of advertising specific to the military around the 40s and the 50s. A lot of it like around the concept of like freedom and like those types of feelings that men and women associate themselves with when they're enlisted in the military. And so they kind of capitalized on those key phrases to help market their products and I think to help increase tobacco usage and tobacco sales. And then I was reading at some point, they also started targeting their wives and their girlfriends. It sounds like you know what I'm talking about. It looks like you know what I'm talking about.
Well, there's a group in the military called the MWR committees on the bases, which is morale, welfare, and recreation. And this is the group on the bases that's supposed to keep morale up and make the lives of the folks on base better. And I didn't know until doing some research for this that the base exchanges, when they sell cigarettes, the profits from base exchanges goes to this, at least a portion of it goes to the MWR committees. So the selling of cigarettes on base, the profits of that goes to this MWR committees. And so the tobacco industry has worked with these MWR committees to do what you were talking about, to hold concerts, to give freebies away. And once that was kind of banned by the Department of Defense, they gave personalized items with the names of their products on them, hats and lighters and all this other stuff. And part of that program was also for the wives. And so they sponsored bingo nights on base and they sponsored parties and other things like that to try to get the wives. And I assume part of that reason was the men were smoking at a much higher rate at that time, and that they were worried the women might help curtail that because they weren't smoking. And so this was to get the women smoking also. The same in that time frame they were doing this was when Virginia Slims was also coming out aimed at the young women and girls.
Almost seen as an untapped potential for the tobacco industry because they knew that once the servicemen came home from war, that, you know, their wives and their girlfriends were going to be curious about what it was that they were doing. And perhaps they were going to want to pick up smoking as well. Right. So I imagine they saw it as this opportunity to make even more money than what they were already making.
Well, and they looked at the military itself as a untapped potential that for sales. That here were young people coming in fresh. They can get them indoctrinated. Basic training for a long time is you have not been able to smoke during basic training. I'm sure that some of them got around that in various ways, but while you were on base for those 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, you weren't supposed to be smoking. But then once they got past that, then they were free to smoke again. And the military smoking rates, when you look at it, the highest are Marines, and the Army is next, and the Navy and Coast Guard, depending on which year you're looking at, are about the same, and the Air Force is the lowest. The smoking rates in the military also vary by being deployed or not. So the Marines and the Army being deployed and fighting in various wars and stuff, much higher rates. And about 40% of the smokers in the military were non-smokers when they started basic training and became smokers afterwards. So the tobacco industry has cultivated that already ingrained culture of the military that smoking is exceptional, use of nicotine is exceptional. Certain branches use a lot more smokeless tobacco than other branches do. And to become part of the group, you need to start doing that. And spitting tobacco and stuff like that is part of your initiation. It's your way to get into the fraternity. And that's been for a long time. Mm-hmm. And at one time, the smoking rates were well over 50% for the military. They have now finally come down over efforts of mostly the health portions of the military trying to get this down. Because the military has to pay a lot of money for the health care of the personnel who use tobacco. The health care back in 2011, I think it was 2008. The tobacco use cost military medicine $1.6 billion to treat those folks who started smoking. Most of them when they came through basic training.
Yeah. When I think about that, it's a little counterintuitive to me because military men and women are supposed to be physically fit at their absolute best to defend, to do whatever they need to do, whether they are overseas or here, in our country. And so it always struck me as interesting that they were encouraged to smoke. From what I had read, smoke breaks were very common because it's like the only way you could get a break is if you did smoke. And it was just very counterintuitive to me when you think about the physical aspect of things, when we want them to be strong, mentally ready, physically ready. And so I was just wondering why you think tobacco was so widely accepted among the branches if we understand that it kind of is counterintuitive. If we had already started to see some of the impact of using tobacco or at least smoking on new recruits and their ability to run a mile as fast as they're supposed to be able to. I'm just so curious as to know why you would think that it would be accepted as a part of the culture.
Well, it's a real dichotomy in the military between the folks who run the military side and the ones who run the logistics for the base commissaries and base PXs and stuff, and the health side. For a long time, the health side, the Surgeon Generals of the Army, Navy, and Air Force have been trying to get cigarettes out, but have been blocked by the commanders above them, that this will harm the morale, that they need this to help with their stress. And part of that on the higher ups on the military side have been from Congress. Congress has blocked many of the things they've tried to do over the years. They've tried to make bases smoke-free. They've tried to make base exchanges and base commissaries tobacco-free and not sell tobacco. But in many instances, this has been blocked by Congress. And Congress, we have the best Congress money can buy. And I don't care what you say about the oil industry or the pharmaceutical industry. No industry is better at Congress than the tobacco industry is.
Yeah, they have deep pockets.
They sell a product that kills 480,000 Americans at least a year. It's probably the number one cause of death in the United States. If you subtract out cancers and heart disease caused by tobacco, it's very close to the number one cause of death in the United States. And yet we still do not give it the due. We do not treat it as such. We have this real dichotomy of, we make lots of money off of this. And in the industry, we really don't want to put them out of business or all these retailers out of business. We have 300,000 retail establishments selling cigarettes in the United States, including many of the military bases. And so there's a large number of instances where Congress has been blocked, especially the House the House Armed Forces Committee has blocked many of the things. And tobacco industry seems like they know what they're doing and make sure that the people on there are well-funded and are their friends. They're from Virginia and North Carolina and Kentucky and such, that many of the things they try to get passed never get passed. Mm-hmm. It's starting to get better today, but still not great.
Yeah. I imagine there's a lot of partnerships between the tobacco industry and the military itself because the tobacco industry invests a lot of money in different people. Like we know over the past several decades, we've heard about the fact how they've invested in the Black African American community and the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm sure I imagine they also invest in the military community. And so I know you have extensive knowledge about the different types of political tactics or community engagement, community involvement that the tobacco industry has done. And so I was wondering if anything comes to mind about the partnerships that may have existed between military and the tobacco industry.
Sure. As one of my lawyer friends said a long time ago, they don't hire the bottom 5% of the Harvard Law School class to be their lawyers. It's the same thing with the marketing people. They don't hire the bottom 5% of the marketing class. They hire the top marketing people. And these people are expert at going after market segmentation. And so Blacks, Hispanics, women, young men, they go after the uneducated, so the ones who haven't completed high school education. There's a definite hierarchy in military smoking with those who have not completed their high school education all the way to officers who have college degrees. Much lower smoking rates on the officers than there are on the enlisted men.
I read a quote. It kind of coincides with what you're talking about what somebody from the tobacco industry had quoted, saying that the military is a great opportunity because a lot are uneducated because they're in with the wrong crowd, because they're kind of seen as these people who don't want to do what they're told to do. So it kind of, what you're saying, I've literally read those words that somebody from the tobacco industry has said about the military community.
There's those quotes in the tobacco industry documents. And when you're marketing to civilians with all those groups, you have those groups in the military. In fact, I think in enlisted personnel, especially, higher numbers of Blacks and Hispanics and lower educated folks are in that group for the enlisted men. And so that's who they're going after also. And once you get them addicted, and it only takes a couple of months to get them addicted usually, once they're addicted, then you have somebody hooked for the next 40 or 50 years buying cigarettes.
Sure. And then when you think about the fact that the tobacco industry writes their marketing or their ad campaigns as the perfect way to relieve stress, you're stressed 24/7.
That's right.
I imagine you're stressed 24/7, whether you are on deployment or not.
Right. And you have to take orders. And so one of the things is that I read was that they consider this a freedom. You can't tell us we can't smoke, we can't use nicotine, but you're in the military where day to day you're given orders to do stuff all the time. Yet why is this a freedom and it's not anything else you do? You're given orders that this is what you're going to do, and that's what should happen.
Yeah. The tobacco industry is very good about picking up on that freedom, that sense of it's my constitutional right to make my own decisions. It's kind of like when you think about trying to increase the age of tobacco products from 18 to 21 several years ago. And a lot of that commentary was, well, if I can vote at 18 and I can enlist and defend my country at 18, I feel like the tobacco industry does an excellent job at twisting those things and making it seem like freedom and using tobacco and being addicted to nicotine or substance that could kill you goes hand in hand.
Right. Absolutely. And use of nicotine and tobacco doesn't improve stress. What it improves is your addiction to nicotine. Once you're addicted and your nicotine levels start dropping in your bloodstream, you feel stressed. That's when you need another hit to get back up again so you're not feeling stressed. It really does not do anything for stress in somebody who's not addicted to it.
So from a medical perspective, because you have a background in medicine as a radiologist, right?
Right.
Correct. What have you seen? Have you experienced working with any military personnel and your experience being a medical professional, and just kind of what have you seen and what are your thoughts about those things?
My only working with military was veterans. I spent 2 months in the VA hospital in Amarillo. which was not a great hospital. But many of my patients were there purely because they smoked cigarettes. In the veterans, in the last study from 2021, almost 50% of the veterans that are under the Veterans Health System were former smokers, and about 13% were current smokers. So well over 50% have a history of cigarette smoking. And one of the big reasons they're actually being seen and treated in the VA hospital system is because their tobacco-caused diseases. Their heart disease, their hypertension, their COPD, their chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and emphysema. And the VA system spends billions and billions of dollars every year treating those former military personnel. In civilian life, if you make it to age 18, you have and haven't started smoking, you only have about a 10% chance of starting smoking after 18. It's changed a little bit with the e-cigarettes, but it's generally true. Whereas in the military, if you've made it to 18, but you're then going into basic training and then you're getting deployed, that doesn't hold any longer. You're a much higher rate of smoking or starting to smoke after 18 than in the civilian population. My look at it is you should be working a lot harder in preventing them starting to smoke by making the bases smoke-free, by not selling cigarettes at commissaries and PXs, and then you have a much better argument that you don't have to pay for this at the end.
Yeah.
They have to pay for it.
I mean, it is important to note that there has been a lot of preventative strategies that have been put in place. There's been a lot of really good policy that has been passed over the years. I think 2017, I had heard that Navy ships could no longer sell tobacco products and things like that. So there has been some headway in trying to prevent and protect enlisted men and women. What are some of the things that kind of stand out to you that have made significant change over the past few decades?
Well, things are improving, but a lot of times the individual ships and the individual bases, through their commanders, different commanders and stuff, have different priorities. One base may not prioritize this or make a big deal about it. The next base may. The next ship may. Back in, I believe it was 2010, the USS Roosevelt, a nuclear aircraft carrier, went completely smoke-free. Congress then got involved and made them rescind that order. The submarines have been a lot better about having no smoking on submarines because you're underwater for sometimes 2 or 3 months on the nuclear submarines, and really smoking any flammable objects on a nuclear submarine is probably not good.
Right.
And so they have done a better job in the submarine force of doing that, of stopping smoking. But from everything I read, whenever they make a new directive, DOD has a new directive on making places smoke-free or making bases smoke-free, they add a lot of exemptions in there. So if you have a room that's directly vented to the outside and has negative pressure, they're allowed to smoke inside, even though supposedly it's a smoke-free facility. And so they've gotten around some of these things. So there have been very few really comprehensive directives for the military that can be completely smoke-free.
Yeah, I think the Air Force is the only branch of service that has completely smoke-free bases.
Yeah, they've done better. And also the military newspapers and stuff, the Air Force is the only one that bans tobacco ads. The others are still carrying tobacco ads. And so that's a dual message there again. You don't want folks to smoke. You want to make the places smoke-free, but yet you're having ads on the magazines and newspapers produced by the military going to these sailors and soldiers. And the same thing with selling them in the commissaries and the PXs. It's the same thing. You're trying to tell them to not do this, but then you're still selling it.
So they still sell tobacco products on bases in the commissaries today? Is it at the same? But I had heard that they were cheaper on base and you didn't have to pay taxes. Is that still a thing? Does that still exist today?
The problem with cigarettes being sold historically in the last 30 or 40 years is that they're sold at a discount. In the commissaries, they were sold, there's like at cost with a 5% markup was what everything was sold in the commissaries. And the BX and the PXs or BXs, the base exchanges, they was like 20% over the market value, the wholesale prices. And so they were still cheaper than the community outside the gate. The other bigger difference, though, is that there are no taxes on those, whereas outside the gate, there are taxes. And so, especially in some communities, the taxes on cigarettes can be, $1, $1.50, $5 in some places. And so the difference in prices is markedly different, even though lately the prices on cigarettes sold on base have gotten higher and higher and higher and comparable to what the wholesale price is outside the base. But the lack of taxes, they're still always cheaper.
I think today they've also done a lot of more targeted effort at probably education. I know that they tried to include that kind of education in certain like leadership training and whatnot for different personnel within the military. I also wonder, I think about the families too, because a lot of men and women enlist with their families and they have children or they have youth, adolescents. And so I often wonder kind of that perspective of things as well. If they think, if whoever does implement these prevention strategies or these educational strategies, does it just stop with the enlisted men and women? Does it also trickle down into trying to create more of an acceptance of all of our enlisted men and women and all of our families should be living this tobacco-free life?
I don't know the specifics of the latest stuff they've been doing. They have put this in leadership training for the officers and the senior enlisted men, and hopefully it trickles on down. I think there are some things in basic training now about smoking and using tobacco and stuff like that that they didn't used to have. And so that part's gotten better. And the numbers in the military have definitely come down. The smoking rates in the military today are slightly higher than civilians, again, skewed for officers versus low-level enlisted men. But they have gotten better. The smokeless tobacco use is still much higher than the civilian population. And a lot of the folks being deployed seem to prefer the smokeless chewing tobacco and stuff. One, you're not lighting up stuff and not creating fire and stuff like that.
Yeah, drawing attention to yourself.
Right, drawing attention to yourself.
I also think about how e-cigarettes are really popular now. And I wonder, does the Departments of Defense or do the military branches and bases, do they treat e-cigarettes the same way as other tobacco products? Or is there some type of, not loophole, I don't want to say loophole, but do you know or have you heard if they also understand the severity of e-cigarettes and do they treat it the same way as traditional?
I think from the health side, they're treating them the same. The Navy banned e-cigarettes on ships in 2017 after they had a number of e-cigarettes explode on ships. And if you've never watched any of those videos, go look at YouTube and look for exploding e-cigarettes. And some of them are pretty amazing on the e-cigarettes exploding in your pocket or exploding in your car while it's charging and destroying your whole car. Well, think of that in terms of a ship. If you're working with the ordnance or the fuel or anything else and it explodes in your pocket, it's a big problem.
Right.
And so Navy banned it, and then some of the other services have started banning it in specific situations. And I think they've started banning the sales of it also in some of the post exchanges and also the commissaries.
So there has been a lot of leeway. I think we've made a lot of progress in trying to ensure that our enlisted men and women are, knowledgeable of the facts, and
Yeah.
they can make the decisions themselves as to whether or not they want to engage in that and trying to create smoke-free environments. But it sounds like there's still a lot more room to make better improvements. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are on what type of policies, what type of improvements should be made to strengthen those tobacco-free policies.
Well, I think number one, all the military newspapers should prohibit cigarette advertising. Two, the bases should become smoke-free with no exceptions. The VA hospital system went smoke-free, but then Congress made made them have to have a smoking area on the VA campus for the patients to wheel their IVs out and go smoking.
Wow.
That's still in existence. That needs to stop, and the VA hospitals should be completely smoke-free. The sales in commissaries and PXs should be banned. They shouldn't sell them. The tobacco industry working with the MWR committees on bases should stop. The free giveaways of either cigarettes or paraphernalia on bases should stop. I think those are the biggest ones. And then the working with USOs and other people who will funnel cigarettes in to deployed personnel especially should stop. I think those are the big ones.
I imagine, I don't know what the quitting resources are like, but I imagine that might need to be strengthened as well. Especially if you think about whether you're active duty or a veteran, you can't deny the fact that these people are addicted to nicotine. And nicotine is a very difficult substance to quit. I mean, it takes multiple attempts to be successful, and some never are successful. And so I don't know what the cessation programs are like, but I imagine they probably could be strengthened as well.
Exactly. And so, yes, that's been shown even in Texas. With the cessation, with the quit lines, with other cessation resources, with cessation medications. Whenever we do advertising, what happens to that? The calls to the quit centers go up whenever you do advertising. So the military they use the quit lines. I don't think they have their own specific ones. I think they use the national quit line. But that should be advertised more. The physicians on bases should utilize that more. The military members should be using those more. And they're also, we've learned this from cancer. When we try to get the cancer patient to quit smoking, it's very important to get their spouse to quit smoking. Because if the spouse doesn't quit smoking, they stay smoking.
Right.
And so it's a dual thing. So you get both of them to quit smoking at the same time. Works a lot better than one doing it and one not. But I think, we could spend a lot more on cessation resources for both the VA and also the military. But again, that funding cuts, as it goes through Congress, doesn't always make it to the final end in these appropriations bills. It manages to get stripped out, just like it does in Texas.
So I imagine cessation strategies would be completely different for, maybe not completely different, but I'm sure there would be some differences versus just civilian people trying to quit using tobacco versus people who are currently enlisted or veterans. Because sometimes I think that their tobacco usage might be tied to more stressful situations, and just the different unique things that they experience and the stress that they undergo. Do you think that how we treat quitting tobacco is different or not?
I don't think it's that much different because even in civilian populations, that's one of the things they always say, well, it helps me deal with stress. In reality, it doesn't. It helps them deal with their addiction. Their nicotine levels have dropped, so they need another fix to get it back up, and they don't feel stressed anymore.
Well, in all the military movies, too.
And that's what I was going to say. All the military movies, what are they all doing in the military movies? The newer ones, The special forces guys are all dipping tobacco and spitting all over the place. The older ones have them all smoking cigarettes. All of them.
Yeah.
All the old movies and the
Eh,
military movies.
Yeah.
So, and nobody's ever put together a long list. I have a long list of people who have died of tobacco. There's a number of generals and other folks on my list. But nobody's put a list out there of, these famous military people who died because they smoked cigarettes, not because they got shot, not because their plane exploded, but they died because they smoked cigarettes.
Because they use a product.
They use a product.
When used as intended.
But yeah, there could be more education on that. There could be more education on the different types of tobacco that they're using. If we're getting 25% of the enlisted men are using spitting tobaccos, then maybe in cessation you need to focus a larger segment on that of how do you quit this? Because some of the folks who are using spitting tobacco have a bigger nicotine addiction than the cigarette smokers do. And now with the vaping, when you can vape high levels of nicotine and nicotine salts, and I mean, you can really have high levels of nicotine.
Right.
That may take a little different strategy also than just plain cigarettes.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was reading another article, and they had done an interview with a former general, and they were talking about ways to try and address all of the tobacco usage within the military. And this general, I forget his name, but he had said that it's unfortunate that it seems to be difficult for us to make changes, because when we try to make changes, I think the tobacco industry lobbies very, very profoundly with the Congress, and then Congress will back out and change their decisions on things. And even the Department of Defense, sometimes it seems like they try their absolute best to do what they can, but it doesn't always work out that way. And so we need outside support. We need people like you and I to not necessarily lobby for them, but to increase awareness for them, to draw attention to this issue, and to try to bring it up and create systematic change for them, because it seems like they're having a hard time to be able to do it internally, and that more support from civilians might bring more awareness and more change for the betterment in the future.
I think that's definitely true for the military, but Congress has also interfered in civilian life too, in many, many different ways. And, we just we have the best Congress money can buy. And the tobacco industry buys as many as they need to make sure the House Armed Services Committee votes the correct way, and make sure that the Senate, I forget what that committee, the Defense Committee, does. They just make sure they vote the right way and not take away their best product from all those poor smokers.
It's an uphill battle, but I think it's
is.
one worth fighting.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The whole nation needs to work a lot harder on this than some other things we spend a lot of money on.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of money on research on heart disease and lung disease and everything else that's caused by cigarettes.
Yeah. It's time to address it. It's 2023.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Dunnington, I can't thank you enough for your time today and your expertise. It really is incredibly valuable, what you've been able to contribute to today's conversation. And I hope everybody that listens is kind of awakened or awoke. That's today's terminology, because it really is a critical topic of conversation, and especially one when we're thinking about Veterans Day being right around the corner. Right. So I want to thank you so much for your time with us today.
Thank you. And even though I have never been in the military myself, I was born on a military base. I lived my first 18 years of life on military bases, and I still have a strong connection to the military, my parents and uncle and many others. And I think it needs to work a little bit better, and they need to do a little bit better job of preventing the number one cause of death in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't leave out our servicemen and women.
No.
So thank you.
Thank you.